Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Weary but relieved, European Union leaders finally clinched a deal on an unprecedented 1.8 trillion euro budget and coronavirus recovery fund early on Tuesday, somehow finding unity after 4 days and nights of fighting and wrangling over money and power in one of their longest summits ever. With masks and hygienic gel everywhere at the summit, which was spread over 5 days, the 27 leaders were constantly reminded of the potent medical and economic threat the virus poses to their continent and grudgingly committed to a massive aid package for those hit hardest by the pandemic. To confront the biggest recession in its history, the EU will establish a 750 billion euro coronavirus fund, partly based on common borrowing to be sent as loans and grants to the hardest hit countries. That comes on top of the 7-year 1 trillion euro EU budget that leaders had been haggling over for months even before the pandemic. The end of the torturous process was announced by the European Council President, who had been chairing the leaders' long debates, with a single word on Twitter: deal. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Marathon EU Summit. Joining me on the program today are Professor Ummu Salma Bava, Chairperson, Center for European Studies, JNU; Pramit Chaudhuri, Foreign Affairs Editor, Hindustan Times; and Gurjit Singh, former ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Salma, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze what were the key takeaways really as far as the recently concluded EU summit was concerned.
Thank you so much. I think I would say there are 4 key takeaways. First, we kept our schedule with the summit. It was to take place physically in March, and it is important that given that other summits have taken place with Japan and China, the virtual summit took place. Second, it's a reminder that we are in a pandemic world, which means we're looking at a very new normal. We're also looking at how India and EU will cooperate within this. We're looking at, can the two sides bring together leadership and resources to address the kind of challenges that are coming up. Third, I think we have a new strategic roadmap, which is a welcome sign. I think it's also about political intentionality, about ramping up what the two sides can do. And it's about the political will to look beyond economics, which has been the framing and defining hallmark of the India-EU strategic partnership. And 4, I think we recognize that, in terms of global governance and public health, has now become a global public good. And I think that is going to impact the way political decisions are going to be taken. So if you see, I think political intentionality to really ramp up the political engagement, a recognition of R&D on research on civil nuclear, as it has been called, is also recognition that India, which is a non-NPT state, has been given that trust and it has been built up. Of course, this negotiation was a long time in coming. And I think 4, it has really heightened expectations. So now, this is where PM Modi had said that you have to look at a time-bound delivery. I think that is very important in terms of, going ahead from this point.
Absolutely. Ambassador, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So what were the main areas of contention, or what were the issues that needed to be thrashed out over a period of 4 days and 4 nights that took the European leaders such a long time really to try and come to any kind of a deal or come to any kind of consensus?
Thank you, Frank. Another 20 minutes and a record would have been set for the longest EU summit ever. And don't forget that at the last one in 2000, there were far fewer countries who were arguing about it. But now you have 27, and then there's interpretation, so it takes very long. But I think the most important part is that the EU delivered the stimulus package of 750 billion euro. The 1.1 trillion multi-year financial framework was actually far easier. But it is this deal which was made important by France and Germany before the Germans took over the EU leadership on 1st of July. That was most important. This will provide real stimulus to Europe. It will allow them to borrow at very low rates using their AAA debt rating of most of the countries. And it shows a unified stance that they will help all the economies of Europe to stand together. The second issue is what Merkel promised when she took over the chairmanship, perhaps for the last time, of the EU. She said, we will have a Team Europe approach. And while Germany has 5 priorities for what they want to do, this was an extra priority and they wanted to do it first. And this got done. Here, the Germans actually moved their position as a country to take a more leadership position and make sure that everybody came around. And the third, I think, this is the first major EU summit post-Brexit. And here you see that with Britain gone, the French and the Germans are now up against building flanks of what are called the Frugal Four and then the Frugal Five, the 5 small countries who have enough clout to try and get their way. So they managed to make the summit go long. They managed to change the 500 billion of grant into 390, and they managed to increase the amount of loans from 250 as envisaged to 360. Most of all, they want to set conditions on how this money would be spent. But I think this is important that the deal took place, as you said, deal. But it still has to go to the European Parliament. It still needs ratification by all the 27 countries. And the first real monies will not start flowing till about a year from now in 2021.
Okay. So since you brought up the Frugal Four, Ambassador Pramit, do you see at some point in time, when this deal is actually enforced by the European Parliament, some kind of an issue being raised by the Frugal Four in the days and the months to come?
Well, I mean, the battle was really about the so-called Frugal Four, which is actually Frugal Five because Finland joined them later on. And it goes to the heart of the problem in the Eurozone as a financial or as an economic entity, which is while the trade and immigration parts of it were fine, and you had monetary integration, financially Europe remained effectively 27 independent governments with 27 different budgets. And so you could never get an agreement, or it was always difficult. There was always a mismatch between the monetary and the financial policies of the European member states and the European Central Bank. And so the original Eurozone crisis and a sort of perpetual problem with the relatively fiscally conservative Northern European countries, in this case led by the Netherlands, but also incorporated mainly the Nordic states and also countries like Austria. Sometimes in the past, Germany has been part of that as well, arguing that we keep our books sound. We don't run up deficits. We don't run up print money like crazy. But here now we have in the Southern European countries do exactly the opposite. And so the Eurozone crisis was partly driven by this, the original this division between the countries, and the present crisis. Or the run-up to this summit was effectively similar, in which you had a major economic recession across Europe. You needed a coronavirus recovery fund, and the question of who was going to pay for this, because the European Union is not a single financial entity. So in effect, you would be borrowing money or you would have to raise the money on the markets, a large portion of it, and it would be the fiscal. It would actually be under the books of the Northern European countries. It was their fiscal responsibility that would lead to people actually buying the bonds that were released. Nobody is going to be buying a bond for $750 billion worth of bonds from Italy or Greece. So therefore, you needed to have the Northern Europeans say, we're going to pay for it. So their argument was that, one, the amount of money, too much of it was grants and not loans. And second, their argument was that you needed these Southern Europeans and some Central European countries needed to had to carry out internal reform. It's kind of like an IMF loan IMF conditionality loan, that you guys run your economy so badly, so you need to change. Otherwise, why should we put up our people's savings to bail you out? And this is effectively what the fight was about. And that they've accomplished that. You had an agreement to reduce the grant quality. There's an agreement for certain degrees of conditionalities to be imposed on the Southern and Central European governments. And perhaps what is most interesting, because I believe this will be a first, definitely on this scale, is that the European Union will jointly be entering the market to raise financial bonds or to release instruments. And this is one of the reasons why Angela Merkel and many others said that this is actually the first step, if you wish, and a major step towards the potential financial integration of the European Union. As I said, they are trade, immigration, and on the monetary side, they are already integrated. But now you actually will have the first step towards financial integration. And that is actually a major step for the European Union. It tends to work a bit more slowly than other sort of multi-organized national organizations on this front. But this is a big step. And if this succeeds, something that the Germans definitely have been pushing for a long time, financial integration of Europe, becomes potentially feasible for the European Union.
Right. Okay, since we are here then, Salma, let's talk about the nature of the deal itself, because there are grants, there are loans, and, so how is this money going to be spent? Where is it going to come from? And what are the what are the technicalities that are really involved?
So I think, both Ambassador and Pramit have pointed out that, this has not been achieved easily. I think what you have to first look at it is not just about money, as it has been said, but this is about, this is about solidarity at a cost. That's how I would put it. Merkel said extraordinary events require extraordinary action, right? But then you have to ask, is that, are they ready for that? So we are not going to see it. It was said that the deal is about saving lives. It's about, saving jobs. It's about providing for, all the requirements which are coming as the pandemic has put. I think there's also a recognition that, the way Europe was configured into the global supply chains, that has been impacted. There are security concerns which have been raised and they have come up in the deal. So this is also an opportunity. And as, Ambassador pointed out, that this is the first post-Brexit kind of a coming together. Let's not forget that Britain was the second largest contributor financially. So at the economic level, the burden sharing has become very disparate. Second, we also see the political cost of arriving at a deal. So if France and Germany were the heavyweights, then Britain was seen as an offsetting kind of a power. It was also seen in terms of facilitating the, pulling together of other actors. So you've also seen the different kind of political group formations which is happening over here. So a tightening of budgets is happening. Pramit has pointed out, the money is not going to come from anywhere else. It has to mean that if, on the one hand, the EU is putting forward to be a more active player globally, on the other hand, it needs the resources to be able to match that leadership. And I think there is, in that sense, this is an action plan, but you will have to see how that action plan will actually deliver. It would mean a lot of cost cutting internally as well to be able to do. It may also mean that a lot of what was being done at the EU level, at the community level, would actually maybe swing back to the state level. How would that be politically received, I think, is something which one has to wait and watch to see how now the deal will get actually accepted in terms of the domestic. We have to keep in mind that when we even saw the solidarity and the action in terms of raising finances to address the COVID, there has been a very unequal kind of impact, first of all, and the response has been very disaggregated, which tells us that, when even in the case of a pandemic, it's not that all EU economies have been impacted the same way. And the second takeaway is that not everybody, even though the deal has been done, so I would see the deal as a political understanding of the step forward. The real point would be in the nitty-gritty of now transferring that political deal of an economic activity together. And that's where the politics will really have to, meet, the rubber will meet the road. And so we'll have to see in the coming months and years how this is going to play out. The 6 months of the leadership of the German EU presidency is a very important point. It will also be, as you've also said, this will be the last big summit for Merkel. This is her legacy-making moment. Remember, in 2015, she was blamed for calling the refugees in. Will she now be able to, navigate in a pandemic world economically? This has also been called a second Marshall Plan for Europe, right? So all the signs on the wall are there of intentionality. it's very important to see that how this will transfer. Will labor unions, work with governments to come through on this? These are going to be very important times, and this is also an opportunity for kind of a reset for the European Union. So
Right.
let's see how it'll pan out.
So, Ambassador, since we are here now, let's talk about this aspect as well. A lot has been spoken about how this could possibly be one of the last big summits, really, as far as Angela Merkel is concerned. And, the future is uncertain, really, as far as the EU bloc and who's going to steer it in the near future is concerned. What do you see happening? Is Macron going to be the one who's going to be taking on this particular position? Is he going to be the captain of the ship, so to say?
I think the Germans and the French have a good understanding, and Germany is the chair for the current 6 months. After that, I think there is Slovenia, if I'm not wrong, then the French coming. So I think they have sort of worked this out that over the next year and a half, this trio will look at matters. But as I said earlier, it is a reformulation within the EU. Now you look at Germany. When several years ago, after the Euro crisis, as Pramit mentioned, they were turning the screws on the Greeks to get things right. Recently, they were not so forthcoming when COVID hit Italy very badly, and the Chinese came in. But today, when they have become the chair of the EU, the Germans are taking different positions on Greece and Italy, and they want more money to flow to them, which is why they took on the Nordics to bring this about. Now, in this, the Germans and the French want Italy and Spain on their side for the future developments in the EU. That is why it is important to keep them on your right side and give them a larger share. So the beneficiaries are going to be Portugal, Italy with about 209 billion. I think Greece will get 72 billion and the Spanish will get about 140 billion. These are huge impetus for these struggling economies. And as a whole, I think European, Indian, and United States stock markets are all up today on the news that this big stimulus package, the unprecedented stimulus package has come up. But if you look at the other way, so I think the Germans are gainers, the PIGS countries are gainers, but the Nordics are great gainers, the frugal five, because not only have they managed to show their power, and as Pramit pointed out, much of the money will be raised in their countries because they have a good rating. Most important, they did what the British used to do earlier. They negotiated a rebate in their EU contributions, which means they will end up paying less. Now, so I think the two countries who are on the kind of getting a rap on the knuckles are Hungary and Poland, because the frugal five went after them, thinking that they were not really abiding by the rule of law, leading to some rather unpleasant exchanges. This is the disadvantage of having a physical summit. You can say everything to each other. If they had just stuck to an online summit, perhaps this cross wires would have been a little bit fewer. So maybe Merkel will do well to have more online summits for the rest of her term. I think these dynamics are what going to help. But what is important is the French-German deal has got that 750 billion extra stimulus package which they wanted. Now, after this, they will go for the Green Deal, they'll go for the digitalization deal, and they will push more pharmaceutical work, including medical research in Europe, which are the part of the German presidency objectives.
Right. So let's change track a little bit and talk about a couple of aspects that the ambassador has raised. Pramit, one, first, of course, this is probably the biggest face-to-face summit that we have seen ever since the pandemic broke out, of course. I can't remember any other one that has taken place over the last 4 or 5 months. That is one. So the Europeans seem to be showing us the way, really, as far as that is concerned. And also, if you look at some of the industries, the big companies in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, they've all opened up. They've all also shown the world as to what a new normal is going to look like and is going to be like. So is Europe going to show the world the way going forward?
Well, there are some European countries that have done very well and handled it. Denmark, for example, Germany, Belgium is still struggling with it, but the Netherlands has done fairly well. France seems to have got a hang of it, and of course Italy, where it began, if you wish, in Europe, has more or less brought it under some semblance of control. Spain continues to struggle, and Sweden, as you know, has gone under an unusual path of doing absolutely nothing to stop the disease and going for herd immunity. So it's a slightly mixed picture as far as Europe is concerned, but definitely, other than the Northeast Asian countries, in particular South Korea, and also some Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Europe is the second best, if you wish, in handling the coronavirus. And I think more or less, at least in Northern Europe, I don't see a major problem with the virus. There will be continuous spikes every now and then, but broadly they've got the sort of right pattern set in, if you wish. But they have, like most of the rest of the world, they've suffered economically as a consequence. And as you mentioned, a number of factories and supply chains are back. But nonetheless, Germany, for example, is its economy depends on massive exports. And it cannot export anything on the scale that it used to in the past because their customers are still in lockdown, if you wish. So it'll still be, the economic costs will remain. I think what is going to be important, as some of the others have mentioned, is that you've now released this enormous stimulus package, if you wish. Europe has a lot of structural and problems in its economy, especially in the south, but there are many legacy industries that should be moved. It takes climate change very seriously, but has struggled, if you wish, to convert its own economy into a more green level. It still uses a lot of coal. It still uses a lot of other issues. It needs to move a lot more, I'd say, on the digital front. If you go to Europe for an Indian, it's actually quite staggering to see how many checks you have to write. You can't make digital payments in the large portions of Europe. They're far behind in a whole host of other fronts. And then the broader integration, especially in the digital and standard size of Europe as a whole. So this is an opportunity, if you wish, for Europe to move its economy dramatically forward, using a lot of that stimulus to both generate jobs. If you close down coal plants and open up solar actually is more labor intensive than thermal power. So you can actually generate a lot more jobs if you just reskill your workers and move it, and simultaneously move your economy in another direction. So these are the type of things Europe needs to be really doing, if you wish, with that stimulus, as well as moving forward. And this also brings in that if you can get that kind of an economic boost, it will also solve the legitimacy problem that the European Union has struggled with, where the general economic decline of Europe, if you wish, is blamed on European integration, rather than on the fact of Europe not carrying out many of the major structural reforms internally. But if you can combine that together, then it changes the nature of the European Union, even within its own public.
Okay, time now to get closing comments from all my guests with the best way forward, starting first with you, Salma. So are there any lessons to be learned for other blocs? Is the EU as a bloc showing the others the way forward?
So, I think there are 3 points over here. One, solidarity always has a cost. Second, as the EU did a very tight balancing of political leadership, intentionality, and the way forward, like as Pramit also just pointed out, is reform and recovery. So there is a green recovery, which is being foreseen, which is very important. The digital, so artificial intelligence, cyber is going to be the way ahead forward, and it's going to transform the rules of engagement. And more importantly, the normative Europe was back, because there was an emphasis on rule of law, on holding to account the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, especially Poland and Hungary, who were slipping. And so this also means that while it cannot be business as usual, the new normal in a post-pandemic world is also about how you will strike balances between the politics and the economics and the values. So like I said initially, I think leadership is going to be extremely crucial. How do you raise the financial wherewithal to drive this? And more importantly, innovation, I think, is going to become extremely important. Here is a very important moment for Europe to be ahead in R&D of a different kind, I think. We're not going to get back to the old. So I think there is this push now, and if Europe can take a combined technological leap with that political leadership, probably we will see, more things coming through. And so in that sense, there's a lesson for others around the world, SARC in particular. There have been nascent attempts, even by Prime Minister Modi. So I think this is a moment to also look at how you can set aside, political differences of a particular kind, but also look at how opportunities for cooperation can be created, even though discord exists.
All right. Yes, Ambassador, best way forward.
Let's look at the example that the EU sets for Africa, for instance. Africa is struggling with a huge debt problem. And one of the ways out, they thought, was to get somebody to underwrite a high yield bond, which is based on good rating, like say the ECB could perhaps set up an Africa bond or create a fund where Africa could then borrow from or park its debt. So if the Europeans can actually succeed on this huge stimulus and raise the money, it will perhaps give a confidence to others that Europe is an alternative to raising money in the United States. And we could perhaps try something like this. The other one on the negative side, in the past, the European Union used to bully countries in other parts of the world, for instance, the ACP countries, Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, that we'll give you so much money, but then you must have good governance. Today, I find that kind of talk happening within the EU. They're telling Poland and Hungary, all this money will come to you if you have rule of law and good behavior. See, I can understand that you say that the money in the southern European countries should not go to pay salaries, but should do the kind of things Pramit has explained. Create assets, create infrastructure, which will create stimulus. Simply paying salaries, particularly of public servants, is not something that let Greece down in the past. So I think these messaging which is happening within the European Union is an important lesson for larger unity like the African Union to understand. And I think there could be some resonance over there.
Right. And Pramit, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
If you're sitting in Europe today, this is the environment you have. You have an assertive Russia that continues to try to undermine you through various means. You have the Middle East in complete chaos, and the Middle East is self-destructing. And the country that used to run the Middle East, if you wish, the United States, has shown complete lack of interest in what happens there anymore. Africa is an economy, or if you wish, as a continental economy that is starting to rise, but obviously has its problems. So if you are European Union, you need to start going out and looking at, even if you just look around your area, you need to become a lot more active than you are right now. You've been riding on the coattails of the United States or on multilateral organizations. Now, between that and then on top of that, you now have China. So you need to become a lot more active. You need to therefore move your own economy, become a genuine European Union, and finally become a major player in the external world, rather than what you positioned yourself in the past as just being a moral actor, which has so far proven to have gotten you absolutely nothing.
Right. Okay. All right. Then on that note, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that this is the first step towards financial integration of Europe. The deal, of course, is a very positive development. How the nitty-gritties are worked out remains to be seen. The next few months and a couple of years are going to be extremely crucial and important. This is an opportunity for Europe to press the reset button and start afresh with the stimulus package. And this is an important moment for Europe to show others the way and take the lead. This is also a lesson for other blocs, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.